So today's guide is all about how to win a UFC fight. This is going to give you the basics on decisions and scoring if you're brand new to watching the UFC. So first off, let's talk about how long a UFC fight is. A UFC fight is comprised of 3 or 5 rounds, and each round is 5 minutes. You'll have a minute in between rounds to sit down, rest, chat with your coach, get some water, and game plan for the next round. Now, a normal UFC fight is going to be 3 rounds. That's 3 rounds of 5 minutes each, about 15 minutes. Now, the bigger, more important fights, those are going to be 5-minute rounds. They're going to be much longer. So every time there's a main event, those are going to be 5-round fights. Also, anytime a championship belt on the line, those are going to be 5-round fights. Sometimes we also get co-main events that are 5 rounds. Every time you're watching a fight and they talk about it going into the championship rounds, those are rounds 4 and 5 that we don't typically see in normal fights. So there are 2 main ways to win a UFC fight. The first is to fight all of the rounds, whether that's 3 rounds or 5 rounds, and then at the end, the judges decide who did a better job. This is called a win by decision. But ideally, you don't want to fight all 3 or 5 rounds. You want to stop the fight before it goes that far with a finish. So finishes are knockouts, technical knockouts, and submissions. Anytime one of those 3 is achieved, the fight is over. Finish number 1 is the one you're probably most familiar with. That is a knockout. And that is exactly what it sounds like. You're going to punch or kick or elbow the other person until they go unconscious. Once they go unconscious, the fight is over. So our second finish here is called a technical knockout, or TKO. That's when the person isn't unconscious, they're still awake, however they can't continue the fight at all. So you are hurt in some way that you're done. Some examples of TKOs might be you take a really tough liver shot, maybe you had a cut above your eye that resulted in a doctor's stoppage, maybe you broke your leg, or you might be totally overwhelmed with hits by the other guy to the point that you can't properly defend yourself and you're super wobbly, however you are still awake. So this would still be a technical knockout. So there are 4 different people that can decide that a technical knockout has happened and stop the fight. The first person is the referee. They will typically stop the fight if they feel like you're not defending yourself properly. The second person is the doctor. So sometimes you'll get what's known as a medical stoppage or a doctor stoppage. That's when, for example, someone has a cut above their eye and blood is just pouring into their eye and the doctor's like, okay, that's not safe. We need to cut the fight there. The third person is your coach. So if you're getting really, really beat up and you are not quitting, your coach can technically do what's called throwing in the towel and quit for you. This doesn't happen very often, but technically it's allowed. And then lastly, you can just quit. This is typically called quitting on the stool because people usually quit in between rounds. Again, you don't see people quitting very often, but you can. Of course, if you quit, your opponent wins, and it's a win via TKO. Now let's talk about the third type of finish, a submission. Now, submissions usually happen when you see them kind of wrestling on the ground. However, they don't need to be on the ground. They can be standing up for a submission as well. However, this isn't done with striking. So the basics of a submission is that you put the other person in an uncomfortable enough position that they have to quit. And a lot of times they do have to quit because if they don't quit the fight in time, you may break their bones, there may be broken tendons or ligaments, or maybe they'll just pass out. Now, when you quit via submission, this is called tapping out. If you need to quit and tap out, all you're gonna do is take your hand and tap, tap, tap it somewhere. It might be on the ground, it might be on yourself. The ref is gonna be looking for that. Once you do that, you are quitting. So those are our 3 finishes: knockout, technical knockout, and submission. If any of those 3 things happen, the fight is automatically over. If there is a finish, we don't need the judges at all. We automatically know who won. However, there is not always a finish in an MMA fight. So let's go over what happens when a fight goes to decision, which means it goes all 3 or 5 rounds without a finish. If you didn't get a finish in your fight, you need to fight all 3 or 5 rounds. Then at the end, the judges decide who does a better job. Let's talk about how the judges decide who won. What happens is the judges assign a score to each fighter for each round. If you get a 10 for a round, that means you did really well, you won the round. If you got a 9, it means you lost the round. And if you got an 8, that means you lost the round really, really badly. Technically, it is possible for the judges to give a 7, which would mean that you did horrifically, but it's really rare for that to happen. For each round, one fighter gets a 10, and the other fighter gets a 9 or an 8. Let's take a look at the different type of criteria that judges look for when assigning a score. The first and most important things they're looking for are effective striking and grappling. For striking, are you hitting the other person well? For grappling, are you getting dominant positions when you're on the ground or you're wrestling? Next, they're going to look at aggression, so are you bullying the other guy more than they're bullying you? And lastly, they'll take a look at ring control or area control. What this means is, do you control where the fight is happening, or are you just kind of letting yourself get chased around? Remember, the judges are assigning a score to each fighter for each round. At the end of the full fight, they're going to tally up all of the points for each fighter. Each judge is going to tally up their scorecard, and then from their scorecard, they're going to decide who they thought won the fight. Let's take a look at our made-up scorecard here. For round 1, it looks like all 3 judges gave a 10 to red and a 9 to blue. However, for round 2, it looks like blue won. All 3 judges gave a 10 to blue and a 9 to red. Then lastly, for round 3, we have red winning again. All 3 judges gave red a 10, and they gave blue a 9 or an 8. All 3 judges added up their scorecards, and all 3 of them found that red won. We have 3 judges, and they may not all agree, so there's different types of decisions. The first is called a unanimous decision. That means that all 3 judges agreed on who they thought won. Next, we have a split decision. This means that all 3 judges did not agree, so we just went with the majority. And then because we can sometimes assign 8s instead of 9s, very rarely you will get a draw, which means that both fighters got the same score. Another very rare way to end a fight is through no contest. This means that a fighter can't continue the fight due to some kind of illegal strike. Maybe you got poked in the eye really badly, maybe you got kicked in the crotch and you couldn't recover, things like that. In cases of no contest, nobody really wins. So with all this in mind, even though there are parameters, judging can be really subjective. And for that reason, fighters don't like to leave it to the judges. If at all possible, you want to win a fight before it goes to decision through a knockout, a technical knockout, or a submission. A lot of times audiences don't really like the judges either because the guy that they think won may not win in the judges' scorecards. So if you're brand new to watching the UFC, maybe you have to watch it with your boyfriend, that should give you a rundown on how to win a UFC fight and what to look for. I'll do some other beginner videos soon on things like how promotions work, how to watch grappling when it goes to the ground, the different types of grappling, how wrestling works in the UFC, everything like that. If you have questions on any of this, please leave a comment, let me know what you thought. I would also really appreciate a subscribe. My content isn't new, however, I am new to YouTube, so I would really appreciate it.